You are listening to MKTV. We are back on the air. Now, normally, I don't start an episode with a monologue, but this particular time, things are a little different. The last time that I was on the air was prior to the bombings that happened in Boston. So I wanted to take a minute and just say some thoughts and put some prayers out to those that were victims of the bombings in Boston. Now, I don't know if this was a terrorist act or some lone nut or something else, and it doesn't really matter. What we need to focus on here, folks, is the heroes, the first responders, the police, the firemen, those that helped the victims in this tragedy. The more we focus and quote-unquote give glory to the criminals that did this act, the worse off it will be. Let's focus on the ones that helped, the ones that actually helped their fellow man, the ones who loved one another. That's what we need to focus on here. Now, in just a moment, we're going to start our episode of MKTV. We're going to talk about the Smiley Face Killers here in just a moment. But before we do that, I just wanted to touch on that for just a second here. So let's take a moment and stop and think about those people in Boston. Sadly, this is becoming a nearly everyday occurrence where we hear something bad on the news. Let's not focus on the bad, let's focus on the good. Good things like this program, where we're trying to make a difference. You can help to do that. And we'll start right now with a brand new episode of MKTV in just mere moments. Thank you for joining me. Hi, we are back on the air with MKTV. This is episode number 66. We're talking about the Smiley Face Killers. Now, if you're a long-time listener of this program, you'll remember that way back in episode number 6, we talked about the Smiley Face Killers. Now, this is a group of individuals, or maybe it's just one individual, but the evidence tends to point towards there being more than one individual. That take college kids who have been inebriated and drinking in bars and possibly is kidnapping them and murdering them and leaving them in rivers and streams all over the country. There's somewhere upwards of 80 to 100 cases of this similar nature. Now, we've talked about this in the past, and I've made some friends lately. I've made my friend Ian, my friend Christy, and another friend named Bill, who Bill is one of the parents of one of the victims, and due to the fact that this is all going on, we decided to go and do this again. So with that, we thought that it would be a good idea to talk about the Smiley Face Killers once again. Now, in addition to that, we have we're going to talk about America's Most Wanted and the status of that. John Walsh himself recently went on CBS this morning and talked about the status of America's Most Wanted. Now, if you haven't listened to this program in a while, first off, make sure you hit that follow button so you can follow along and you can get all of our broadcasts. But if you have not heard the news, unfortunately, America's Most Wanted has been canceled. Yes, it's been canceled not just from the Fox network, but it has also been canceled from Lifetime. John Walsh himself is looking into other options. He's talking with Fox, and they're trying to get the show put onto other channels and other stations and things like that. But they have not had much luck yet. I will play a clip with John Walsh momentarily, in which he can explain a little bit better what's going on with the status of America's Most Wanted. Now, there is a pilot episode for a spin-off show known as John Walsh Investigates. Now, so far, there's only been one episode of that show that has been filmed. Lifetime was supposed to air that as a series, but with them canceling America's Most Wanted, it appears as if they're putting that on hold for the moment. Will they have John Walsh Investigates on Lifetime in the future? Nobody knows at this point. Will America's Most Wanted show up on CBS or CNN or some other type of channel? It's possible, but nobody really knows yet. It's sad to think that this show has been off the air for about 7 months now. This show really needs to find a home. For what it's worth, capture number 1203 occurred just recently, even while the show was off the air. A lady whose last name was King was recently captured via a tip from a AMW viewer. So it's good to see that even while the show is not on the air, that they're still capturing fugitives. So that's some good news right there. So in just a second, I am going to play a clip of John Walsh explaining what exactly is the status of America's Most Wanted. So we'll go and we'll play that right now.
With us now, John Walsh, also our senior correspondent, John Miller, a former FBI assistant director. Welcome to you both. So, John Walsh, before your show, did people even have a sense of this? I mean, how did you see things change?
Well, Fox approached me in 1987 and said, would you like to host the first reality television show modeled after Crime Watch UK, done by the BBC in England, on a brand new one-night network called Fox, owned by a man named Rupert Murdoch. I went, no thank you, I don't know anything about TV. Who's Rupert Murdoch? What is reality TV? And they said, well, we have one little hit with a guy named Johnny Depp, a struggling musician. And so I agreed to do it because after 6 months, a child killer was the first guy they wanted to do, David James Roberts. I'll never forget it. FBI top 10 guy who escaped from 5 life sentences, raped 27 women, and murdered 4 children. My wife said, this is what we do. Go do it, John. And that started America's Most Wanted.
And when did you realize that your show had a huge impact?
All the TV critics said it won't work, it'll fail, it's the father of a murdered child host, untried, it's never been done before. 3 days after the first show aired in February of '88, we nailed David James Roberts, sociopathic murderer. Guess what he was doing for a living? Running a shelter for the homeless on Staten Island while he was on the FBI's top 10. Then the show was a hit and we launched.
John Miller, and from the law enforcement perspective, it really did change things, didn't it?
It was unique, and it was a boon for the law enforcement business. In the FBI, one of the divisions that was under my control was investigative publicity and public affairs.
Right.
There's a dozen people who sit around every day trying to figure out how can we get the face of this bad guy out in front of the public. And, you know, that's, well, you put them on the wall of the post office.
Right.
This was before the internet really had
There was no
taken
vehicle
off.
like this out there before this.
And this came along and it changed the whole business. We could say, we want this guy bad. We could say, let's line it up with America's Most Wanted. And plus, that was in normal people we were looking for a long time. 17 top 10 fugitives. I mean, aside from the hundreds of others, 17 of the 10 most wanted captured just off tips from this show. But there were cases like the murder of Everett Hatcher, a DEA agent, where they would just stop everything and do the whole show on that one case and really give us the kind of push we couldn't get.
So, John Walsh, and given even that record, your show has been canceled. So what's next?
Well, I have a pilot with Lifetime. They've been very nice to me, and I've wanted to reach out to my friend Jeff Zucker at CNN. We've caught guys off of 45 in 45 countries. I've worked with Interpol. Whether I host it or I don't host it, whoever does it, it needs to be done. We've caught 1,200 fugitives, brought home 60 missing kids. I think it's a great use of television, and I hope it continues because I've been there. Took 27 years to solve my son's case. I know what it's like to be frustrated and not get justice. We had great success on our internet, caught 40 guys off the internet in the last 2 years. I think it is something that needs to be on television because we really are the court of last resort.
Right. John Walsh, good luck. Thank you very much for being here this morning, and John Miller as well.
All right, so there you have it. You heard it from John Walsh himself. He may be going to CNN. He might not even be the host at some point in the future. It's up in the air at the moment here. We don't really know. I know that there are some other individuals that are interested in being host. I think Elizabeth Smart, I think, was one name that was thrown out there. So will AMW resurface? Will it be rebranded, republished as something else? That remains to be seen at this point. Okay, now we're going to go to commercial in a few minutes, but before I do that, I need to explain something. Okay, we're going to talk about the Smiley Face Killers when we come back, but I need to explain something. Okay, sometimes I get flooded with so many different cases and so many different projects that I don't have enough time to properly do a episode the way that it should be done. So what I do is sometimes I ask other advocates and other media outlets and whatnot to assist me in doing such programs. Okay, now I'm going to play a clip later after we come back from commercial from my friends Ian and Christy. I've spoken to Christy personally. We've chatted through email and stuff like that. But they're going to be talking about the Smiley Face Killers. But this is a lengthy clip. It's about 80 some odd minutes. Okay, but they are going to talk about the Smiley Face Killers, and they're going to help me to finish this program. I will be back after their segment has aired. We're going to link up with their show, and we're going to play their clip. And when their segment is finished, I will be back with a monologue and other information and stuff like that. Make sure you hit that follow button. Share this program with your friends. The Smiley Face Killers are very vicious, evil people, and their story needs to be brought to light. So after the commercial break, we're going to talk more about the Smiley Face Killers right here on Missing Kids TV.
With us now, John Walsh, also our senior.
Now you can get the same AMW gear that cops all ask us for. AMW ball caps, AMW shirts, AMW mugs, and much more. Just go to our website, amw.com. Click on AMW gear. Soon, you'll be making a difference with style.
Well, as a couple of inches of snow piles up silently here in America's heartland, I'm reminded of a couple of things. First of all, that Vancouver would love to have the snow we're getting. They're like cursed when it comes to the weather in Vancouver, although apparently they've been holding it together just enough for the Winter Olympics. But here in the upper Midwest, this recent slathering of snow reminds us that There are clues that are waiting for the spring thaw, clues to a series of murders that many people feel strongly have been taking place. Overall, across the country, there's been over 100 disappearances of college-age men who fall into the same category. They would be considered successful young men, good-looking students, who, at least for a period of the last evening of their life, had gone out drinking. And not ridiculous kinds of, stories, pretty typical sort of drinking episodes. And then somehow were never heard from again. Many of them have been found weeks, sometimes months later, sometimes, sadly, after a spring thaw. And they were found along or in various rivers along the I-94 corridor, I-94 being a major highway that runs all the way to the East Coast. And there were some clues at the very beginning at these scenes where the bodies were found or where these boys were last seen going into the water, or where the last time somebody found any evidence of them, like, some shoes or something that linked to them right at the shoreline. And that coincidental image was of a smiley face. And some people started to say that there was a connection between all of these deaths, and that the Smiley Face Killers, as they began to be called, might be some sort of cult that was going around, and they were capturing college-age guys who were inebriated, and then they were holding them for a period of time for varying degrees of perhaps sexual torture, or at very least just capture, and then they were drowning them along the river. In almost every case, these deaths have been ruled either an accidental drowning or intentional suicide. And they were all tied to the alcohol that person was drinking that night, that's why nobody knew about it. That's why there was no suicide note, that it came about sort of spontaneously after the alcohol consumption on the last night of their life. But there were other people out there, including two retired police detectives, or one police detective, one retired police officer from New York, who hit the case anew, and they came up with these connections. And they tried to get the federal government involved to look at it as a national police agency like the FBI would, and they were rebuffed at every opportunity. And in the past, we've enjoyed the conversation as much as a conversation like that can be enjoyed, with a reporter from a TV station in the Twin Cities who left her job, who'd been on Good Morning America after she was on the show too, at talking about the evidence that was left at the scene, the trouble getting police to investigate them as something other than a suicide or an accidental drowning, and the possibility that there was some sort of connection through the graffiti. Well, so many of you have asked for an update that I asked Christy Peel if she would come back. And she's coming back tonight, not just as a reporter that's now turned investigator. I mean, she was investigating it as a reporter, but now she realizes it's just her mission. And so she's going to go through all the files herself, along with the help of some people who she was able to enlist, like a medical examiner who will join us during the show and talk about how they're getting this wrong in Michigan, and how, in her opinion, and in the evidence that she's seeing, there is a strong case to be made for at least a malevolent hand in the death of many of these young men. Maybe not all 100 tied together, but enough that when you look at it for where the investigation stands right now, that the FBI has to get involved. We'll tell you more about that. We'll talk about the evidence. We'll talk about the jurisdiction in Michigan that is refusing to investigate this. We'll have the medical examiner on the phone with us tonight, who will talk about the difference between what the local coroner determined about this missing boy's eventual death and what she knows to be the truth about what happened to him for the days that he went missing. And we'll get into all of that coming up next on Coast to Coast. This is Ian Punnett. Well, I think I got the setup right. We'll check on some of those details, but I know that throughout the evening, what you're going to hear tonight on Coast to Coast is a story that almost seems too bizarre to be true, and yet almost a story that falls along some pretty predictable lines. That is to say that there are elements to this story that'll just make you nod your head and you think, well, here we go again. A case where men are disappearing on college campuses and nobody seems all that concerned about it. The charge has been made from the very beginning that if these were women that were missing, if these were women who gone for, 10, 15, 20, 30 days, there would be a much greater uproar. There would be people would somehow be more open to the idea that there is a serial killer on the loose here in the United States. But because they're men, there just doesn't seem to be the interest level within the police authorities. It doesn't seem to have the same. It doesn't seem to raise the same alarms that these cases would if they were women. Christy Peel used to be a reporter for 5 Eyewitness News and has continued to investigate what we have, for lack of a better term, we've been calling it the Smiley Face Killers. And thank you, Christy, for giving us time on this tonight. You're beginning to feel like almost like the Smiley Face Killer angle, the graffiti angle of the story may have been kind of a red herring and something that kept police authorities from investigating.
Yeah, good evening. It's funny because I think the public has grasped onto the Smiley Face Killers name and image, but I think that in law enforcement circles, it has done negative things for this story and has just perpetuated it as a conspiracy and not as something that is factual.
Okay, explain how the Smiley Face Killer angle started and why you don't think that's the way we should continue to talk about it.
Well, and the bummer in all this is that I blame myself because I was working at KSTP in Minneapolis, and we had been working for quite some time with 2 former detectives, police officers in New York City, who were convinced that these drowning deaths were connected. And when we pressed them for some evidence to show that they were connected, they brought to us the smiley face graffiti that they said they could find at these different locations. And that's what we went with when we told the story in Minneapolis and on your show and on Good Morning America. And that's kind of the title, the name of it, that stuck. Now, the problem is that these smiley face graffiti images are everywhere. We all see them. And law enforcement, that's not proof. You're not going to take an image of graffiti to a courtroom. You're not going to tie it to someone and then tie that same person to a homicide. I mean, I guess you could, but right. It's a little bit more difficult than actual hard factual evidence.
Now, there were some things that were unique about this, about the spray painting that was going on at some of the scenes of where these men went into the water, were presumed to go into water, or where they were found. And one of those had to do with a word that was spray painted. It was in Michigan, wasn't it? That was spray painted that tied to a guy who was missing in Iowa.
That's right. Yes, Insinua was the
Insinua
word. Mm-hmm.
And explain that. I mean, that does seem really, that of all of the, I mean, spray painting, smiley faces, you're right, they're ubiquitous. So how can you begin to say, well, this was tied to this or that? I mean, they're everywhere. People, that's just the most easy. It's almost like you warm up your night of graffiti. You warm up your can by doing a smiley face. That's how you know your can of spray paint is working, is do a smiley face. So they are everywhere. But this Sinua thing, that was an odd sort of coincidence. Explain what happened in that case.
Well, this was from the 2 New York former officers. They said that they were at a scene of a death in Michigan and that they found the word Sinua. And they wondered what that meant, and they thought it was quite odd. And then they were in Iowa several months later looking at a death there and found that the road that ran right next to the river was Sinua. Now, we reported that. I have not seen an image of that Sinsinua. I'm not saying it doesn't exist at all. I'm just saying that I haven't seen it, and that's something that they base some of their theories on.
Now, it's important then to point out, too, that these two particular police detectives ran into some credibility issues when they took this case, and I know I personally walked this case into the hands of a former FBI profiler and asked him to look at it, and other people that I knew to look at it and say, what do you see? What do you hear in this? Is there any truth to this? And some of the pushback that came out about these retired police officers is that they had run out of money to investigate this on their own, that they were looking to be supported in the furthering of this investigation. That may not be an unreasonable claim, but it helped to complicate their public image. And you have since decided not to continue to work with them?
That's right. I haven't talked with them for about 18 months. The families that I talk with and the people that I have aligned myself with now don't have any conversations with either of those former officers.
But you are continuing this investigation. Why?
You know, I had seen things along the way that really convinced me that there is something going on, and if I have that kind of information and if I do nothing, then I think that I'm as guilty as the people committing the crimes.
And in this case, what you're saying is you see a connection between at least some of these 100 and some odd files of college-age men who had one more night of college-age fun before they were found dead in or around a river.
You know, the disturbing connections that I'm seeing are connections of injustice, of unfair investigation, and of inadequate. The families have been treated similarly. It's difficult for them, and they don't have an advocate. They don't have anyone listening to them, and I don't know how it happened, but I became that person.
Yeah, that's called destiny. So you as the advocate for the families of these, in some cases still missing men, but in other cases known, where the bodies have been examined by the local coroner, and the coroner determined that this was either a suicide or accidental drowning, and the family is saying that's not possible. That's not my son. Look at the terrain in which he disappeared. There's no way he could have fallen in. He had everything to live for. There were no signs of suicide. I mean, the families are making the cases, but they're falling on deaf ears.
Right, and I don't know why it's like this, but when a family of a missing child says, hey, my kid wouldn't do that, for some reason some investigators write them off or don't want to hear it. And that's unfortunate, because a lot of times these people, they know their children better than anyone else. And if they say, hey, my son would not run off with a hooker like you're telling me he did, the police brush them off and don't start looking for them. And that has happened in more than one case where that's what the parents were told.
Okay, and there was no evidence that he ran off with a hooker?
No evidence, except, young men, they get drunk, they disappear, he'll be back, just bear with us.
And then they don't come back, or their bodies are found later on in the river?
That's right.
Okay. How many men, I mean, as you look at the case, I know that, the investigation went pretty wide there for a while, and lots of numbers were bandied about. What do you think is the current number that you believe may indicate one person or a group of similarly inclined people working together may be responsible for what percentage of that original file of over 100? What's the number now you think we should be looking at in terms of how many of these cases are connected?
I think that there are 80 people who fit the profile with unexplained circumstances. I can't answer how many have been killed or how many have been killed by the same people. I think that we need to go one at a time to figure that out. And honestly, I'm a trained journalist. I was trained to ask questions, and when I don't have answers, go find people who have the answers. And law enforcement is going to have to get involved to answer that question. That isn't something that anyone without a badge, without subpoena power can do.
But you've worked with people who have the background in law enforcement, like this medical examiner we're going to be talking about tonight. Can you tell us more about her? It's
Dr. Michael Sikorica. It's a him.
Oh, him, sorry.
That's all right. It all started about a year ago when I knew I was actually researching for a book. Someone wanted me to write a book, and I wanted to continue to tell the victim stories, and a book made sense. But in that research for that book, I realized that there were some things that didn't make sense in a certain case in Michigan, and I didn't have I don't have the expertise to get the answers. So I turned to a former district attorney in New York, Trish DeAngelis, who was fantastic. She reviewed the case with me. She had been involved in was very familiar with these cases, and took that information to Dr. Michael Sikorica, because Trish and I we aren't experts in this field, but he is, and said, look at this. Here's some of the things that we think are a little bit off. We don't have any expertise. Tell us what you think. And part of what I then did is I went in and interviewed some of the people over the phone, people who found his body, and asked them questions and then handed that information over to Trish. So that was kind of how all three of us were involved in this situation.
Okay. Trish was the one I was thinking of when we were talking about it. So of the cases that you have, how many of them have been reviewed now by somebody other than the original investigating authority, local authority, where the college boy went missing?
There are several that have been done on a small scale. We have one that has been done from start to finish, all the way through, taken it to law enforcement and gotten an answer from them. That is a long process. So, I mean, we're trying to do this very slow, but we have one that's gone from start to finish with an answer to law enforcement. Because one of the things that that I believe strongly in is that we shouldn't be taking this information to the public before taking it to law enforcement. So the reason we're talking about this now is because we did take it to law enforcement, we did get an answer, and now we need action.
And in this case, then, in just a few minutes, we'll be joined here in the conversation by the forensic pathologist who examined this one case. And this is the case of somebody who was missing in Michigan, and when the local coroner looked at the body, they said what? What was the determination made in the police report and on the death certificate? Accidental
drowning. And that determination was made before the toxicology report was back. That's a commonality that we find in a lot of these, where really all the information isn't back and the family and the public is told accidental. So in this case, it was an accidental drowning, and it was based on his blood alcohol level, and the case was closed.
Can you tell us real quickly about the case we're just about to hear about?
Sure. The victim in this case is Todd Geib. He was 22 years old. He was last seen at a party in an orchard in Muskegon County, Michigan on June 12th, 2005. He lived about a mile away from this outdoor party and decided that he would walk home. He was very familiar with the area. He was an amazing swimmer. The place he was living at the time had a lake in the backyard. He was supposed to just walk home, nothing out of the ordinary. People who were at that party said that he had been drinking, but that he didn't appear heavily intoxicated. And it wasn't the first time the guy had been at a party. So he wasn't unfamiliar with alcohol.
Right.
He, during that time, called someone, and the friend of his who he called said that she couldn't understand what he was saying, that it sounded like wind. At one point, he said he was in a field. Then no one hears from him for all this time. 20 days later, they find him in a lake about a quarter of a mile from the party, opposite direction of his house.
And 20 days later, in the opposite direction from his house, they find his body in the lake, and the local coroner determined that he drowned that night.
Yes.
Okay, and that would have meant that the body had been in the water for 20 days. And the medical examiner, the former forensic investigator, our current forensic pathologist that we're about to talk to, said what? What was his conclusion? We have about 30 seconds.
That he was dead no more than 5 days. Dr. Sikorica took that information, got it in the hands of 200 other medical examiners who agree that he couldn't have been dead for more than a few days. So where was he?
Then where was he? And that brings us back to, again, is there somebody out there that's capturing these young men, holding them for a period of time, and then drowning them later, and nobody's investigating other than Christy Peel? We'll talk to her coming up next on Coast to Coast. This is Ian Punnett. I think the link up is still there at coasttocoastam.com for my blog, but I didn't put anything fresh up tonight. Just had too many things going on this weekend. But a couple of thoughts about Werewolves from last night, if you want to grab that. More specifically about the new Benicio del Toro movie about the Wolfman. And then also link up last night through Streamlink to the show with Andrew Zimmern. He's the guy on the Travel Channel who does the show Bizarre Foods, who flies all over the world and visits indigenous cultures and eats the most disgusting crud you can possibly believe. However, he learns a lot along the way, and the shows are very entertaining as he, finds out what people eat and why, and then he samples it, even though some of the things he's eaten are some of the most disgusting things you could possibly imagine. He described one dish that he had to try to sit through as tofu soaked in the fluid that sits at the bottom of dumpsters. But it's a popular dish somewhere, and he struggled through it. And even in here in the United States, in some regions like Mississippi, Appalachia, even up in Maine and L.A. and Alaska, there are these very bizarre foods, even here in this country. And Andrew had a very entertaining first 2 hours. And then after that was a book about the body language that we could all learn from, the Body Language Handbook. And I really enjoyed Gregory Hartley, former U.S. interrogator for the military, who is has an expert in body language and how to read the people who are being interrogated. That might come in handy here sometime when it comes to the so-called Smiley Face Killer story. If we can get a suspect, it will be a day when perhaps we can finally get insight into what's happening to these young men, these young college-age men who, along the corridor of I-94, seemingly on other side of this highway corridor that stretches all across from the upper Midwest all the way to the East Coast, young college-age men are going missing. And then when they're found, it just seems like the pattern is it's determined that it was accidental drowning or suicide, until people like our next guest, Dr. Michael Sikorica, takes a look at the case. And we'll pick up the story coming up next with Christy Peel, the former reporter who is still acting as the lead investigator in this case, trying to find a fresh look from police authorities on this cold case next on Coast to Coast. This is Ian Punnett. We're getting an update on something that you all have asked about now over the last couple of months. People have either emailed in or called when we were doing open line segments and said, what's the latest you've been hearing about the Smiley Face Killer story? So we talked earlier with Christy Peel, who said she kind of regrets in a way that the story got badged the Smiley Face Killers, because we really don't know that it has anything to do with the graffiti. What we do know is that there's a profile of these men who go missing, who are later found dead. And part of that profile is, unfortunately, that the police authorities that investigate when the bodies are found come to a very early and it seems like stubborn conclusion that despite evidence or family testimony to the contrary, that these guys merely accidentally drowned or they committed suicide. So enters Dr. Michael Sikorica. He's with the Forensic Identification and Profiling Laboratory, which is in New York, where they, as it says on your website here, Dr. Sikorica, you provide quality, customized, and timely forensic identity consultation and educational outreach. I'm guessing that means that you pick up the slack a lot for investigating authorities that need the lab help, and or you do work for people who are in the private sector who need a lab like yours to do forensic identification. Is that accurate?
Yes, Ian. It's actually only part of what I do. My major role is as a forensic pathologist. The laboratory was created several years ago to sort of fill in the gap with some laboratory services that could be useful to the community and to law enforcement and even the defense community if they need it. My primary job, though, is being a forensic pathologist and doing forensic cases. I do between 500 and 600 autopsies a year and travel quite a ways in the upstate New York area doing these cases.
Are you brought in then by, say, a local county, an attorney general? Who brings you in to do the pathology?
Well, I am a county medical examiner in one of the counties up here in New York, but I also do contractual work with about 15 other counties. So I travel and I work for the county coroners and sometimes the county medical examiners.
Do you remember how you got involved in this case originally with Christy Peel?
Yes. The case was brought to me last spring by Trish DeAngelis, who was very interested in the case and just asked me to take a look at it. And I received very preliminary report material, a very hard-to-read autopsy report, a few pictures, and I was really taken aback by the pictures primarily of Todd and the circumstances which I came to understand a little bit more later on.
But Christy and I were just talking about that. And Christy, you can jump in anywhere along the line here to make sure that the story gets furthered in a clear manner. But as we were talking about, then you got this preliminary report that said this guy had been in the water. The local ME had determined that he was this missing college guy had been in the water for 21 days. Was it, Christy, a total?
Yes, he was last seen June 12th, and he was recovered July 2nd.
So what did you see right away, Dr. Sikorica, that made you raise an eyebrow that maybe this report wasn't getting the full story?
Well, without being too graphic, the degree of decomposition, the natural changes that occur after death, did not appear consistent with someone who had been missing in the water for 3 weeks. It was surprisingly sparse. Even at reading the autopsy report, the description of the internal organs and such really appeared to be a person who had been in the water 3 to 5 days at the most.
Does temperature have anything to do with that? I mean, could the local medical examiner have had more information about the temperature of the water that might have prevented the body from decomposing in the manner that you would have expected?
Yes, that is a possibility. This small lake that he was found in was relatively shallow. He was found the early part of July, I believe, on the 2nd. Been missing for 3 weeks in June. There could be some temperature effect on this, but I think that would behoove them to explain it, how that would work.
It would have to have been a kind of a sudden freak cold front or something that kept the water extra cold during that period or something.
That would be one way to explain it, perhaps a very cold temperature in the lake itself, underground springs or something like that, but it doesn't appear that there's any explanation for it.
And so...
Can I jump in for a second?
Please do.
The man who found Todd is a diver, actually, and it was a private lake, and I talked with him initially, and that was one of the most fascinating conversations, and that's kind of when I took it to Trish and said, we need help here, because he'd explained the shape of that lake is kind of like, almost like a hook, and if you look at it like an upside down J, and at the bottom of the longer part of it, of the J, is where would have been the closest location to the party, and that's where the police determined that Todd would have entered that water. And it's very rugged and very... the terrain is difficult around there, and they never found footprints or anything. But what this diver and the man who found him said was so odd is that Todd was found kind of on the tip of the J, and that means that he would have had to go through what they call there the Narrows, and it's very shallow and it would be very difficult to get through. He said he had trouble with his boat, and he can't imagine how a body could get through. And he described that water as being warm, and so he was very shocked that Todd would have been found there, especially when he was in that water very frequently during the time Todd was missing, and then he never saw him, and then one day he went out, and there was Todd on this far section. So that water is one of the reasons that, Trish and I thought, okay, we need help here because something doesn't fit. But I just thought that water piece would help you.
Yeah, it does help. And so no indication that there's any huge variance in the temperature. And in fact, it's hard to imagine that the body would have traveled from a point where the local police report determined that he went in at the bottom of an upside down J and is found having traveled a great distance and found somewhere else, and supposedly having been in the water for that entire time. Dr. Michael Sikorica, you look at what did you ever have a chance to examine the body itself?
No, I haven't. I've only worked off the report, the police investigation materials, and the photograph.
But based on your reputation and your experience, you make a determination that says this guy could only have been in the water for 3 to 5 days, which says, then it begs the question, where had the body been? Where had the guy been? Now, do you determine that the body had only been in the water for 3 to 5 days, or that he had only been dead for 3 to 5 days? Dr. Sikorica?
Yes, I would say that he appears to have had been deceased for 3 to 5 days, and most likely had been alive prior to being placed into that water. There's no indication or no way that I can actually say his condition prior to being put in the water, but he'd probably been in that water for 3 to 5 days at the most.
So the conclusion in your report is that the local medical examiner, perhaps well-intentioned, is just flat out wrong.
Well, he never made a real assumption of how long Todd had been in that water. That's not a part of his report. He assumed that the cause and manner of death, the cause being drowning, the manner being accidental, that was his job. And nowhere in his report does he really state that, there's a discrepancy between the appearance of Todd and the suspected time frame of him being missing. So he doesn't delve into that realm, really. And
But
most of us don't as forensic pathologists unless we're pushed.
Right. And so, okay, so then your report, as you're brought in as a consultant on this, your report pushes that. What happens?
Well, Trish and I craft a letter together at my office, and we basically provide it to the Michigan State Police and the Attorney General's office of the district attorney in that county, asking them to reopen the case and take another look at it.
And what did they tell you?
Well, I haven't the exact reply myself, but according to Trish, they refused to re-examine the case.
Just for people tuning in, Christy, will you re-identify who Trish is in this story?
Sure. Trish DeAngelis is a former district attorney in the state of New York. She had some involvement with some of the other cases, and I connected with her, and she feels as passionately about all of this as I do, and I would say we're working now on this as a team.
So the conclusion here is, as you would describe it, Christy, is that this guy must have been, he was somewhere else for these number of days when the night between he went missing at that party and when he's later on found in that lake, that there's somewhere else he was other than dead and in that water, correct?
That's right, and during that time when he was missing, his cell phone was not used, his credit cards were not used, he didn't call his family, and he was found wearing the same clothes that he was last seen in, except for his cell phone, and one of his shoes has never been recovered.
Okay, and so what is it that the family believes happened to Todd, to the boy that was missing?
They are at a loss just like everyone else. You have to imagine when they got this news from Dr. Sikorica how difficult it was for them to think about, okay, if he was missing and he wasn't dead, where was he? Who was doing what to him? Why? I mean, there's so many questions. This has not been an easy project for them, and I give them so much credit for being strong enough and brave enough to go through it and to really want answers because they think it could help other people. But they don't know. They have no idea.
Was there anything in the local examiner's report about any potential harm that had been done to Todd's body before they found him?
No, the only odd thing that happened is that at the end of June, so this is back when they didn't know where he was, the family hadn't heard from him, they were looking everywhere for him. The law enforcement released some information to the public and went to the family and said that based on some rumors, they believed that Todd was dead, and they thought that he was hit by a car and buried in a shallow grave. And they told the family that at the end of June, and that's reported in newspaper articles. And the newspaper articles and that letter that the Michigan authorities sent to Trish and to Dr. Sikorica and to the family is all posted on my website. So you can see and read all that for yourself.
Okay, and I definitely want to get back to that. And so, Dr. Sikorica, there's nothing in this body's condition that leads you to believe that he'd been hit by a car, buried in a shallow grave, taken out of the shallow grave, and then put in the water?
No, absolutely not. There was no traumatic injury at all noted by the pathologist at the autopsy. It was a very straightforward autopsy, well done. Didn't find any evidence of trauma.
And so, what's your conclusion, Dr. Sikorica, as you look at this? What is it that you think happened to this guy? Any idea? An instinct after years of investigation? Anything?
Well, I've performed about 8,000 autopsies in my career so far, and this is one of the most strangest, bizarre cases I think I've seen. I don't know where he was or what he was doing for that length of time, whether he could be held captive, whether he could be off on his own for some reason. I just don't know.
But it doesn't. Whatever it is, there's more there to be investigated, and the proper authorities in Michigan just aren't doing it.
They feel that they have done everything they can do, and they refuse to open the case. And it's not uncommon for a police agency to feel they've done everything and close the case when they've completed their work.
Christy, what do you think should be done next?
I think that someone should tell the family what happened to him. If he didn't get into that water on his own accord, that means that someone out there did something to him. And I think that after talking with his family and knowing more about Todd, I don't think that he would, take a swim or whatever. And his blood alcohol, which we haven't mentioned yet, was 0.12. So he wasn't overly intoxicated to the point that he couldn't. He was a strong swimmer, had saved his dog at one point in a lake. So he was familiar with water. So I think that law enforcement, I think that the people in Michigan should demand some answers. And there's contact information for the prosecutor, the only person in the county who can reopen that case. And the reason that I think that this is a case that should be looked at is not only for Todd's family, but that same night in another state, another young man went missing, also found in water. Are they connected? We don't know, but someone in law enforcement should maybe find that out.
Okay, well, I think Dr. Michael Sikorica, you did a fabulous job here, and I think we got everything from you that we needed to better understand this case. Christy, I'm going to ask you if you can hang on past the top of the hour. I want to find out what other case like this have you investigated? What, if you can start to put some of these cases together, what you think might be happening? Who do you think will be a profile of the person that might be involved in a disappearance of somebody like this young man, Todd? And Dr. Michael Sikorica, thank you for your time, and also thank you for your ongoing efforts to help investigations like this, to give hope to families that they have a way of trying to get past when a local, sometimes political, but sometimes just overburdened bureaucratic agency doesn't have the time to put into it. It's nice to know that somebody out there at your level is willing to take a look at it. So thank you so much tonight, and for giving us the time.
Thank you, Ian.
Keep up the good work.
Thank you.
Dr. Michael Sikorica. All right, so then hang on. We're going to continue this with Christy Peel after the top of the hour. She said that night somebody else went missing. So as she's been working in this with the stack of files, along with the former state's attorney from New York, working with other investigators on this case. If she were to put together a profile of who is doing this and what is happening, what is her instinct, what is the conclusion of these informed experts that with whom she's spoken, what conclusion are they coming to? Coming up next on Coast to Coast, this is Ian Ponnet. So we're talking about the story of the Smiley Face Killers, which has been an ongoing investigation, started as a TV piece, ended up on Good Morning America. We've been talking about it all along with Christy Peel, who in the past 12 years, as the story goes, about 80 young college-age, good-looking, generally academically successful men have just gone missing and then later on were determined to have drowned accidentally or have committed suicide. And these cases all seem to be bundled along the I-94 corridor. And there were similarities in these stories other than that, because the more they began to look into it, the more they realized that police were just pretty quick to sort of just dismiss the cases. Just say, he was at a party, he walked by the river, he fell and he drowned. And that may be true for many of the cases. It might even be true for most of the cases. But we know for a fact that it's not true for all of them. And the police had already had to reverse themselves once in one well-known case, which we'll talk about just a second. And now we heard in the last half hour on Coast to Coast of a case where the local medical examiner determined that a guy went in the water the night he went missing. 21 days later, they found the body, yet a nationally known and respected private consultant comes in, takes one look at this case and says, no way. Said this guy had been in the water for only as many as 5 days, not the missing 21 days. And yet they're unwilling to change the way it's being investigated in Michigan. It's case closed, even though there's this huge discrepancy. So where have these college guys gone in between the time of the night that they go missing and then the night that the day they're found sometime later on in a body of water? We'll talk about that from what we know and what we can speculate about coming up next. Who is taking these guys? What is happening to them? All that we can know we'll get to next with Christy Peel on Coast to Coast. This is Ian Punnett. So, Christy Peel, we were just talking about the case of Todd, is it pronounced Geib, do you say?
Yes.
Right. In Michigan, who goes missing, and then 21 days later, body is found. Police say that he drowned that night. He must have wandered off from the party, gone into the water drunk, and drowned. And yet, we heard from Dr. Michael Sikorica, pathologist, who says no. The body there's no way the body could have been in that water that long unless the local police or the forensic pathologist can come up with some sort of explanation about some temperature differential. It's summertime and the body should have been much more decomposed than it was. Very likely he'd only been in the water for 3 to 5 days. So we have this time differential. Let's just call it 15 days time differential between the night he goes missing and the night he ends up being found. What do we know about that? What do we think happened during that period of time? Based on the other stories you've investigated from this corridor of I-94 and these college river town drownings, what do you think happened?
I don't know. I really don't know, because I think that whoever had Todd or whoever Todd was with is a sick individual, the kind of person whose mind works differently than mine. I really don't know. And a lot of people have asked, who is doing this? Why are they doing this? Man, I think when we figure that out, we're going to find a dark human being of a kind that we haven't met yet.
So somebody out there could be working off of this main highway corridor, going to these small college towns, looking for parties, and acting as a predator when drunken college guys stagger away from parties, walk out of bars, and are in an area that is isolated for a period of time where they may be vulnerable to being, say, I'm just talking, hit with a pipe, hit with a stun gun, lured into a car by a woman, whatever, but they get in and somehow they're missing for a period of time. What evidence do we have that this has happened before? Anything?
Happened before.
That this would fit a pattern. Like I guess I'm thinking of the case of Chris Jenkins.
Oh, sure.
Right now, here is a guy who, the same profile. This story actually did take place in Minneapolis, and this is explain the story of Chris Jenkins and what did police say happened to what they later on had to admit to.
Sure. Chris Jenkins was last seen at a downtown Minneapolis bar on Halloween 2002. He was got in a verbal discussion with someone, a bouncer, off-duty cop at the bar, and he was kicked out. He was kicked out with a very cold night, without his coat, without his cell phone, without his wallet, and he was left on the street. So he was missing for several months. They found him in February in the Mississippi River, and right away, the private investigator that Chris's parents hired said, all right, we've got a homicide here. There was different information that he was getting on the streets. And then when they found Chris, he had on some clogs, like slip-on shoes that didn't fit quite right. They were loose. And his pants were, a Halloween costume, kind of that, cheapy fabric. It was all, his shirt was tucked in, he was all put together, and he was on his back, which is very unusual in a typical drowning case. Victims are found on their stomach. And police were saying that, he jumped off the bridge, and they still maintain, last I heard, that he somehow was thrown off that bridge. But initially they said it was an accident. That case was closed. At some point they told his family it was a suicide. Needless to say, case closed, and then after some information came forward, they reopened that case as a homicide. At this date, it is an inactive, unsolved, open homicide. Yeah.
But a murder. And they got information later on that said, oh, no, yeah, he went, he was killed. And so now they're willing to say, oh, well, he must have been murdered. But for the longest time, they were willing to just say, oh, it was accidental, even though he had both his shoes on, his shirt tucked in, and he was found on his back.
Yes, and his mother just came out with a book. Her website is footprintsofcourage.com, and that's the name of her book. And she goes through everything. I mean, she has done amazing research, and all the police records, everything is documented in that book. But there were many signs right from the beginning that something was wrong. And that's something that we've seen in so many of these cases, is that, right away, things are not right. And it's just that, I think when you look at them individually, you don't see that. And I don't blame these police officers. They're not, trying to make some big, massive conspiracy. They're doing their jobs, and they've seen, they see kids go missing and college kids go missing. It's just that you have to look at them on an individual basis. You can't close a case before you get all the information, before toxicology reports are back. I mean,
right.
These are the kinds of things that we're seeing. But Chris Jenkins, in all these cases, is the only one that's officially open and a homicide.
And been reversed and said, oh, we were wrong on that one. But there are so many that are exactly like the Chris Jenkins case, or at least seemingly following exactly along the same lines. Now, is there anything that makes you suspect? Have you heard any testimony? Has anybody said anything that would infer that these guys are being captured, they're being held for a period of time, and then after somebody is done with them, then they're taken back to they're drowned not far from where they last went missing?
About a year ago, I was pretty interested in that aspect of it and did a lot of online research and was going to different, I would get the names of the people who these guys were with and go to their Facebook pages and their MySpace accounts and all of that. And then I realized that even if I would get some good information, I can't do anything with it. I don't have a badge. I don't have subpoena power. I can't arrest people. I'm not a trained law enforcement officer. So that's
right.
when I decided, all right, I am doing nothing but wasting energy here. The one thing that I can do is get the information, get the right people involved, and get it to police officers.
And it's on Christie's site. If you go to coasttocoastam.com, you just click onto Christy Peel, and it'll take you to the sfkillers.com website. If there's a better name for this investigation to tie this all under the name of, what would it be?
I don't know. I've thought about that. Campus killers. I don't know. I've thought about it, but for this Smiley Face Killer thing, it's sticking. I also have, ChristyPeel.com, and I have the same website on there. I'd like to get rid of the Smiley Face name. I don't think it's helping anyone, especially not in the eyes of law enforcement, and that's who we need to have believe this stuff. I don't know. If you think of one, you let me know.
No. Well, I think it is interesting how perhaps, as you say, when it's easier to dismiss for some people can just hear it and then just dismiss it out of hand without giving it the attention that it deserves. So a name in this case probably is important. And yet there, some of these cases may produce a consistent quality or a characteristic to them that would beget a new name if the police were willing to continue to investigate. So right now it's Smiley Face Killers that's the only thing that ties all these stories together, or at least seemingly ties together many of them, is the smiley face spray paint that is found, at or near the scene of many of these crimes. Again, whether that has anything to do with anything, nobody knows. So, and I want to take some calls here at the bottom of the hour, and the phones are already ringing, and I'm sure there's lots of people that have questions for you and or suggestions. And so if everybody can just hang on, we'll get to those coming up in a few minutes. And I would encourage you to go through and read the blog entries that Christy has put up on her webpage, in which he goes through this and some of the information that you've included. Talk about the documents that people can click onto, because you mentioned it briefly last hour, that are on your webpage.
In the Todd Guide case, we have some of the newspaper articles that were happened initially right after he went missing. They document when the police believe that he was hit by a car and buried in a shallow grave, and told the family that at one point. That's on there. We have a portion, two big kind of chunks of the letter that were sent to the Michigan officials, the county prosecutor, Tony Tagg, on behalf of Trish DeAngelis and Dr. Michael Sikorica for his parents, that were basically saying, we've got a lot of information, here's some of it. And at the bottom of that letter, you'll notice it says, we have much more information we want to share with you. We never heard back from them. In fact, our calls weren't returned at the end. So they don't even know some of the stuff that we have, because they didn't even seek out to get it at the end. So I think that's important. But the only thing that we omitted for the public consumption is that there were some kind of more things that were a little bit personal about Todd, and some things that were just too graphic. So for the sake of his family, it doesn't,
sure,
unless you're a forensic pathologist, doesn't mean anything. We took that out. The other thing that we have on there is the full letter that was received by Todd's parents from the Michigan State Police, stating that the case will not be reopened.
It will not be, they say. Period.
They say it will not be reopened.
No matter what anybody finds, no matter what evidence may come forward, they will not reopen it.
And what's unfortunate is that Dr. Michael Sikorica, his opinion about the evidence and the decomposition and some of the other things was backed up by 200 professionals, medical examiners. It was at a conference. They took the information there. It wasn't under the, hey, this is a Smiley Face Killer case, guys, agree with us. I mean, it was, these are scientists. Here's the information. What do you think? And they agreed with him, and that was all in this letter. And what Michigan State Police did is they had the woman who's actually responsible for doing autopsies in the county. She reviewed the autopsy. The person who had her job before her did the autopsy, so she's reviewing that, knows the guy, I'm sure. It's a small place. And then said, we did it right, we have no reason to reopen it. And that was it. And it's pretty disappointing, because much of the other information that we said we'd provide to them, they didn't even ask to see.
So, at one point there'd been some discussion about a killer cult, or, a group of people traveling across, coordinating together on the internet. And that was an angle of this story. Right now, there is no basis to continue to believe that?
Some people still say that. I don't think that there is proof, hard proof. If there is, whoever has that information should be taking it to the FBI and not just talking about it. I think that the most important thing is to get information, take it to law enforcement. But the same night that Todd Guy went missing, there was another young man in another state. And if they're connected, that's something that law enforcement should be looking at.
Okay, and you're also being assisted in this by a former federal agent?
Hector Boreas, yes, he's a former federal agent. He was responsible for cracking a serial killing ring in Mexico. And he has looked at Todd's information. We've talked extensively about some of the other cases, and he believes that this is the work of a serial killer. And more than one person, because of the time and the different states that this is happening in. And he continues to look at it and would like to see feds, someone else get involved. And the one thing that has been really exciting is that the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children has the file on Todd Geib. It has the file on Chris Jenkins. It has the file on Patrick Kaisha. I gave them about 300 pages of documentation, filled out some surveys for them. They're making a presentation for some scientists in February, at the end of February. And the goal isn't to say, hey, you guys, there's a smiley face killer out there. Go figure out who it is. It's to say we continue to see mistakes made in the investigation. We continue to see medical examiners missing some key pieces of information. If you get a case like this, wait until you get the toxicology reports back. And so that they're going at it from a scientific angle, which is what this stuff needs. The smiley face graffiti business isn't advancing it in the circles where something can get done.
And so this former federal agent too, as he's looked at it, he's had experience. Why does he believe the federal agents like him that would have investigated this case, as he found a serial killer somewhere else, why does he believe nobody is investigating this?
When we've talked about it, when the feds did go in and look at it, they looked at the information in La Crosse, and that information, from what my understanding of what happened there, is that they looked at the police files, compared them, and said everything was done properly. And I don't think that they looked at anything from other states, and I don't...
Oh, we lost her. Okay. Don't know what happened there. Phone dropped out. Those things can happen. Sometimes, I have a remote phone and the power could just go dead on you, or you can have a power outage. But whatever the case is, we had her there and then we didn't. So we can, as I mentioned, we're going to go to the phones early anyway, and we'll take some of those phone calls coming up in just a second while we hope to reestablish contact with Christy Peel. So we can go ahead and grab that. Christy, I don't know what happened to your phone, but glad you're back, because you were just, that's okay. So you were just saying then about why the federal agents may not be responding to this. They went to the La Crosse, Wisconsin case. They just looked at it and they say all the T's were crossed, all the I's were dotted, nothing for us to do here.
That's my understanding of what happened there.
Okay. And the La Crosse, Wisconsin case was?
There were several. Believe there's been 8. And there's actually a young man who last night went missing in La Crosse, and they're looking for him, and there's footprints that actually lead to the water in his case. I keep getting emails about him.
Last night in La Crosse?
2 a.m. Mm-hmm.
Well, okay, and so of the 80 cases then that you look at, I mean, it would be amazing to think that all 80 cases are all connected and that all 80 people are the victims of the same person. Somebody with the expertise like this guy Hector you spoke of, what does he think likely is a scenario? Has he said anything about the number of victims that he thinks, if you looking at the cases that he would tie together?
He hasn't. I haven't asked him that specifically because when I talk with him, it's about this specific case and this specific case, or it's, remember when we saw this and that case? I mean, we talk kind of, individually. But even if, I believe that there are accidents. Accidents happen, absolutely. And some of these guys have only been lumped into all of this because they fit the profile, they're the right age. Definitely accidents happen. We're not seeing these same accidents happen with women. We're not seeing them happen over spring break when people are drinking, near water. We're not seeing them happen over the 4th of July when people are drinking near water. So even if you say of those 80, 40 were accidents, so say half were accidents, 20% were suicides, okay, that still leaves you with a significant number for someone to be doing this. And even if they're not connected, we got to figure out what happened to those young men. They deserve it.
And nobody else is doing this right now other than you, and then the people that you can bring in along the way. What would you like to see happen as a result of tonight's show?
I would like people to get on the website, contact the prosecutor in Michigan, tell him what you think, and then support what the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children is doing. I have a Facebook page that is, I'm trying to get big numbers so we can take it to a group someday and say, look, we have 50,000 people who believe something's going on. Help us.
Right.
So all of those links are on my website, which I know you can get to by your website.
Yep, coasttocoastam.com. It'll take you right there. And then also you can find out more about Dr. Michael Sicarica, who we had on last hour. Obviously, he has what people call the bona fides to to be making the claims that he is, that there's something about this investigation in Michigan that's just wrong, and they ought to reopen it. So especially if you're a Michigan taxpayer, if you're a Michigan resident, go take a look at what your state has determined is not worth looking into again, and said they will not reopen this case, no matter what evidence comes forward. What's that about? Go find out more by starting at coasttocoastam.com. Your questions, your comments for Christy Peel to the top of the hour, and then we'll do open lines for the rest of the night on Coast to Coast. This is Ian Punnett. All right, so we already got a couple of people lined up who have questions about the so-called Smiley Face Killers and the work of Christy Peel. We have a half hour with her, and we'll take advantage of this coming up next with your questions and comments about this, what appears to be a string of disappearances across the upper Midwest, and how nobody is investigating this. This goes all the way to New York. This goes all the way into the East Coast. These small college towns experience kind of the same phenomenon. It doesn't happen to women who are leaving parties. It just keeps happening to men. They leave a party by themselves. They get kicked out of a bar by themselves. They're walking. They disappear. And sometime later on, their body is found in the water. And in one case, only one case we know of, the police said, okay, we were wrong. It was an accidental drowning. That's one. And then the other case that we heard tonight is in the state of Michigan, where the independent consultant came in to look at the pathology report and said, this isn't right. It's got to be reopened. And Michigan is saying no. So where are you with this? What is it that you think would inform this conversation? And do you have concerns that we just haven't brought up? We'll get to it next on Coast to Coast. This is Ian Punnett. All right. Dave is in Columbus, Ohio on Coast to Coast for Christy Peel, investigator in the case that remains the Smiley Face Killers case until another name comes up. Hey, Dave.
Hi, Ian. How you doing?
Good. You're talking with Christy Peel. Go ahead.
Yeah, real quick, I think I got a couple of questions that might help you out. Also, there might be a case that happened here in Columbus that might be related. First of all, I want to know, there seems to be always this connection with water. Is there a particular type of a lake or whatever the victims are found in? Is there a specific depth that seems to be associated with it?
No, there have been victims that have been found in creeks, shallow water, lakes, the Mississippi River. Even there was one victim in a fountain.
So in other words, okay, so now my next question is, does it seem to be that the bodies are placed so they'll be found deliberately?
Some people think that. It does. It would make sense that if you wanted some evidence to be lost, that you would put the body in a place where people would find it after they quit looking. You know,
the reason I'm asking the question is I'm trying to determine whether or not there might be some kind of significance to the fact that the bodies are found in water, so that the perpetrators want the bodies to be found. See what I'm saying? So it means something. It means something to them, and so they want the body to be found as part of this particular act that they're involved in. The reason why I'm asking is because there's a case that happened in Columbus where we had somebody who fits the profile that disappeared, but the body was never found. And so what I'm wondering is it possible that this victim was put in a nearby river, by the way? There was a river that was not far away, and they just weren't, in other words, the body just didn't surface, or the river took it too far away and it got caught underwater, and nobody was dredging the river, you know, and they just didn't found it. They never found it. That's what I'm trying to figure out by asking that question.
All right, Christy, go ahead.
And are you talking about Brian Schaefer?
You know, I think that might be his name. I'm not sure because I'm retired from doing investigation stuff. I quit before that case went down. It was like he disappeared from a bar on campus, and he was never found. His dad was trying to find him for a number of years, and he died. So it's an unsolved case.
Is that Brian Schaefer?
That's Brian Schaefer. His father was killed in Hurricane Katrina. And I've been. Yeah, it was very sad. He spent the last years of his life really trying to figure out what happened to his son and died not knowing. So some people think that, I guess I've heard a couple different things. Either the body is put somewhere and then it's placed, in a river or wherever, and it isn't found by accident. I mean, they want it to be found, but for some reason it isn't found. Other people think that while these young men are being held, possibly, there would be some trauma that could accidentally happen. Like in the case of Todd Guy, but there was no trauma physical that was obvious on his body. Now, if you're holding someone and, you know, a bone is accidentally broken or there's a big fight and there is some evidence that would be on that victim, then it may be in your best interest to ensure that that body is never found.
Well, let's get, it does. Julie, west of the Rockies, Spokane, Washington, for Christy Peel, investigating this string of college-age men's disappearances, many of which may be connected, but nobody is investigating other than Christy. Go ahead, Julie.
Yes, just a quick note. My son plays Xbox Live, and on the Fallout 3 game, one of the icons that you can pick to be you has a smiley face on it.
Yeah.
And a lot of kids are playing these games down in their basements. And also, this is the type of game that they can talk to each other.
Yeah, there's that, and of course, and thank you, Julie. There's Watchmen, the movie that had that connection to a smiley face. In the case of both the graphic novel and the movie, it was Watchmen with the smiley face with a bullet hole in it. I mean, it's so prevalent a symbol that it's almost hard to get a grip on how it could be being used specifically in this case. But her point is well taken. That kind of thing, you know, it's chicken and egg on how that pops up in Xbox and whether or not people are inspired by it. Michael's in Green Bay on Coast to Coast for Christy Peel. Michael?
I had a quick question, comment for Christy. First, I can't believe that this is the first time I've ever heard in a public forum about these series of killings. I attended Viterbo University in La Crosse, Wisconsin from 2002 to 2006. And in that time, I think 2 or 3 young men were found after drinking at the bars, were found in the Mississippi River. You know, when it happened after the second and third times, college students start to assemble and start to discuss this.
Right.
And there was a palpable, I don't know how to, perhaps an indifference or negligence of the local law enforcement, that people would come forward and say, I saw this guy on 3rd Street last night, you know, coming out of the Helm or the other bars. And they would say, you know, thank you, we got a guy working on it. But there was a certain dismissive tone about it. I guess I just can't believe that this is, I mean, other than obscure newspaper articles, this is the first time I've ever heard it discussed in a public forum.
Well, good.
And also, just a quick question to ask Christy to give. I've only heard about this along stretches along the Mississippi River in Wisconsin and Minnesota. Could you possibly tell maybe a little more descriptively, geographically, the belt along which this is expanding?
Fair enough. Go ahead, Christy.
Sure, it goes all the way from Minnesota over to New York State. There's some, we were talking earlier about Columbus, Ohio. There was just in the last couple weeks a man found in Montana. This is a long, you know, I think it's kind of that 94 corridor, but it certainly spreads out beyond that. What we do know is that we're finding this in Midwest, colder climates, not on, you know, portions of this country that are on the ocean or that are in warmer climates. It's primarily colder climates during the winter. Todd Guy is one of the rare ones where it's one of the summer months.
Yeah, let's highlight that too a little bit, that when the summer comes along, these cases drop down dramatically. They don't happen. It seems to only happen when college is in session, and you would think that if it's true that young college men just get drunk and then they go and they accidentally drown, that this would be happening all the time in the South, the Southwest, California, and these, we statistically don't see the same numbers, correct?
That's right. We're not finding it in any of the places when you'd expect it. I said before spring break, I mean, that's when the goal for a lot of college students is to drink, and most of the places where they go are completely surrounded by water, and it's not happening then. It's happening when they're trying to get fully clothed from a bar to their dorm, and then somehow they're ending up the other direction in the water.
Eric is in Michigan on Coast to Coast for Christy Peel. Eric?
Yes, Ian.
Go ahead.
Okay. There's a retired FBI agent from California who has investigated similar murder scenarios, and he ultimately connected them with satanic ritualistic groups, and ultimately connected it to a covert ops community of the intel, like CIA, etc. And that indirectly has been corroborated by a guy by the name of Alan Shefflin, who Whitley Strieber interviewed, and the author of Mind Manipulators. Of course, there's Kathy O'Brien, Mark Phillips' Transformation of America.
Right.
Okay.
And when were those kids? That was. I mean, Kathy Phillips. That's decades ago, correct?
Okay, but let me bring it up to date right now.
Okay.
There's a fellow out of Ohio, Cleveland, I believe. Stan Monteith, Radio Liberty, interviewed him several times. Russ Dizdar. He now is a minister after being law enforcement, and has a website, Ian Shatter the Darkness. He authored a book similar to that name, Shatter the Darkness. I think it's .net. But he has been bringing the street people off the street to care for them, and ultimately he discovered these mind control scenarios that they reveal to him, and it's really, really astonishing. And then there's
go ahead. We have time for one more. Go ahead.
This one is William H. Kennedy, investigative journal, WilliamHKennedy.com. Between the three of them, Ian, I would say her best leads are going to be there for a viable murder explanation, and they're involved in this.
Well, that's very interesting. I appreciate that. I'm sure Christy got that information. I'll be clicking onto William H. Kennedy coming up at the top of the hour. Jeff is in Tempe, Arizona, on a wild card line for Christy Peel. Jeff?
Yeah, I'm here.
Go ahead. You're talking with Christy.
Hi, Christy.
Hi.
Yeah, I've been actually following this on Coast to Coast for a while, and I didn't really remember if you said it before, but right now you said something about a word that was in two locations at once. You said it was Sinawa?
Sisinawa.
I remember in the past, there was, if you slightly, variate the word, and you pronounce it Sinaway, in ancient Egyptian, it means he who travels alone. And it was a story of a man who was a righteous man. He wanted to serve the poor. He was a physician, and he was forced to kill his friend, I guess for the greater of the good, kind of like, maybe a surgeon would look at it, where you cut out cancer, you cut out some good tissue around it for the greater good of the whole, I guess, is the way that his life story went.
Well, that's an interesting connection. I hadn't heard that before, but the address connection was the Sisinawa. But sure, I mean, at this point, at least people are thinking about it here, Christy. They're trying to find ways to try to romance the stone here, to get an angle on the story, to try to break through what seems like a logjam at the bureaucratic level.
I'm amazed at the people. My website, my blog, when I launched it a year ago, I had no idea that so many people would be so interested. I just wanted a place where I could put information I found. And there's a woman actually who bought, when there's actually 3 missing cases in the Midwest right now, one in Wisconsin, one in Minnesota, and one in Iowa, all happened the same week in January. All that information is on my site. And, please look at their pictures. Let's hope that they're not part of this and that they come home safely and soon. But she wanted to see if maybe someone with a pilot's license could be involved. So she purchased, with her own money, FAA logs to see if someone had been to all 3 airports. I mean, people are passionate about this.
That's very interesting. I hadn't even thought about that angle. A private pilot would make a lot of sense. Luis is in Utah on a wild card line. And then we'll go to open lines coming up at the top of the hour. Luis, you're talking with Christy Peel. Go ahead.
Hey, and good show tonight.
Thank you.
Christy, have you ever thought about getting a hold of some psychics to bring them in and I'll listen off the air?
Yeah, ordinarily, I don't always have a lot of faith in the whole psychic thing, but every little thing helps. Have you talked to anybody, or has anybody come forward to you?
Different people have, and the families all feel differently about that. Some use them quite frequently, and some want nothing to do with them. So at this point, it's their sons. I kind of want to do what they want. And the other thing is that law enforcement frequently aren't interested. and we don't need any more reasons for them to write this off.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Again, if you're just tuning in, I'd recommend to go back and catch from the beginning on this on Streamlink. We're talking with Christy Peel, investigative reporter, made it on Good Morning America with this story, and then it sort of stalled, but she's continuing with the investigation on her own and looking up at these 80 files and continuing to go through the material, find medical examiners that are willing to review it, find federal agents that are willing to give us some perspective, lawyers, anybody she can, to try to come to a determination whether or not there could be a serial killer at work that local police authorities have not been able to coordinate an investigation on or just don't seem to care. Tim is in Pennsylvania, east of the Rockies, on Coast to Coast for Christy Peel. Tim?
Yeah, how you doing tonight?
Good. Just got a minute for you.
Yeah, I have a question. We're investigating a case in Pennsylvania called the Todd Sees case. I was asking Christy, has she ever heard of it?
Spell the last name for me.
Todd Sees, S-E-E-S.
I have not.
Now, this is very strange. This guy went missing for 3 days. It's in Northumberland, Pennsylvania. It was back 2005. He took his ATV up the mountain looking for preseason deer. And his wife was concerned because he didn't come home the next day. She called the authorities. They searched the mountain. There was a little pond right near his house. They went in there with scuba divers. They couldn't find nothing. They had no idea what this guy just fell off the face of the earth. 3 days later, they found something near the pond, which looked white, but they couldn't get to it because the brush was too thick. So they brought in all this equipment to tear it down. Here it was him. He was found dead. They found him in his underwear. When they found the body, they wouldn't give him his wife the body. They sent it down to Allentown, Pennsylvania, and did an autopsy. Well, they couldn't determine why he died. So the body was actually sent to Fort Indian Town Gap, which is near Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. Now, it's kind of strange that this happened. Why would they send this body to Fort Indian Town Gap? But now they're saying that this was like, they did a toxicology report. They had no idea why he died. But later, the local authorities said he died of a drug overdose, and the family is like furious over this because there's no way. There's also more information that I have that, if you could email me or anything, I would definitely get you.
Well, Tim, you can link onto the webpage, right, okay, Christy? And you could contact Christy from there. Is that right, Christy?
Yep, right on the website there's a contact us, and you can contact me right there. My email's up there.
And that's you can link up to that, Tim, at your convenience at coasttocoastam.com and look for the Christy Peel connection. Our last call from Alan, I believe, for Christy Peel. He's from Orlando on Coast to Coast on a first-time caller line. Alan?
Hey, Christy, what's going on?
Hi, how are you?
Hey, being like late 20s and a drunk, this is something that's near and dear to my heart.
I've thought
I was wondering what kind of tortures or stuff, because I heard about that, looking into it on the news and such, are we talking about that the MEs aren't finding? And a second question is, what would be, that you've heard, would be the psychological profile of someone who would be doing something like this? Because I heard there's some guy saying it was like a mess about or like someone who wasn't successful, but it seems like it's kind of more put together than just some goofball.
All right. Well, interesting thought. Christy, you want to comment on that? In the sexual piece, we don't really have much evidence, correct? It's just some assumption on that?
That's right. And if there's, he talked about torture. If there's torture, there's nothing being left on the bodies. No sign of that.
Right. But certainly being kept in captivity would be torture enough, and what more than that, we don't know. But and then the other question that he threw out there at the end?
The feds are saying this is impossible. Serial killers don't work together. We don't have, we don't have any evidence of this happening before. My answer to that is, before Hitler, we didn't think that was possible either. So I don't know what kind of monster we're dealing with.
But there have been cases of serial killers that have worked in tandem. I mean, this would not be a first, that there would be some sort of competition or there would be people who sort of tag teamed on something like this.
And we know that these folks are well-funded, well-traveled, and awfully good at what they do.
As sad as that is to say, thank you so much for you being so good at what you do. You keep up the good work. Even if in the end it turns out to be 5 of these cases connected, there will have been nobody else trying to connect them. And so thank you for keeping the pressure on, keeping the story up. Everybody log on to Christy's website. Just go through coasttocoastam.com and let us know, Christy, when you've got an update coming up, okay? We'll get you back on right away. That's Christy Peel, reporter. Open lines. Everybody else, we'll clear out the phones, and you take us where you're going to take us coming up next on Coast to Coast.
Yes, it's dark and I am scared.
It can happen in an instant. You get separated from your child. Your dad doesn't feel right, but he's not sure he should call 911. You just feel uneasy walking to your car. With 5-star urgent response, one touch and you'll be immediately connected to 5-star agents or 911.
Calling 5-star.
This is 5-star. How can I help you?
I can't find my mom.
Using enhanced location tracking with GPS, these agents can determine your location and get you the help you need.
An ambulance is on its way.
Okay, thank you.
Can you stay with me till I get to my car?
I'll stay with you all the way.
Hello, Mrs. Williams. I've located Sean. He says he's by the steps.
5-star urgent response. It's help at the touch of a button.
Calling 5-star.
Now available at Walmart, Sears, or online at greatcall.com.
Alright, I'd like to thank my friends Ian and Christy for that lengthy segment there, helping me finish my quota of making my weekly episode about the Smiley Face Killers this time. If you're new to this program, I always end my shows with a little bit of a monologue. Just some words from the heart. No scripts. Nothing written down in front of me, just something that I say that comes straight from my heart. For the last about hour and a half now, we've been talking about some individuals, or perhaps one individual, known as the Smiley Face Killer. This is not the first time that I've spoken about this person or group of individuals. When you hear stories like this, and you're listening to this program, I want you to just think for just a moment or two of what it would feel like if your loved one was taken from you. If the person that you love more than anyone in the world went out drinking one night and then just suddenly disappeared, and then later on that their bodies were found drowned in water, and then, as if that was not hard enough, to hear an investigation is closed, that no matter what evidence you find, nobody wants to listen to you. Now, I covered this story way back on episode 6. For the last 60 some odd weeks, I have not let this story die. It's important to get this out there. These are people's loved ones, and they deserve justice. They do not deserve to be forgotten like yesterday's trash. These are people that had lives, they had friends, they had careers, they had ambitions, dreams, hopes, and they deserve better than this. That's why I'm not going to stop bringing light to these cases. I have what I think is proof of connections between these cases. I've talked about them on this show in the past, and I will continue to talk about them here on MKTV. I've talked about them on the YouTube channel, I've talked about them on my Facebook page, and I've talked to them about it here on Spreaker. These are evil, evil, vicious people, and they need to be brought to justice. If you have some sort of information, if you have a tip, send me a message on my Facebook page at facebook.com/missingkidstv. I've already had many people do so. I've talked with Bill, I've talked with Ian, I've talked with Christy, I've talked with a lot of people about this. And I will continue to make this case not fall into the cracks. You can help. If you're hearing this story, send it to your friends. Let them know what's going on. Is there some sort of a cover-up? We talk about cover-ups a lot on this show. Sometimes police are not doing their jobs. Maybe there's some sort of an inside job going on. Maybe there's a lot more to us than meets the eye. It certainly is food for thought, don't you think? Now, I'm just one person, but I'm dedicated to being an advocate. You know that if you listen to this program, that each and every week I will bring criminals to justice. I will help find the missing. I will do everything in my power to bring justice where it is deserved, to bring loved ones home, and to capture fugitives. We've done it in the past, and together we can continue to do it. Can we solve the Smiley Face Killers cases? Maybe. But I know one thing for sure. I can't do it without your help. My name is Steve. You're listening to Missing Kids TV here on Spreaker and YouTube. And I'll see you again next week. Thank you for listening. You are listening to MKTV. We are back on the air. Now, normally, I don't start an episode with a monologue, but this particular time, things are a little different. The last time that I was on the air was prior to the bombings that happened in Boston. So I wanted to take a minute and just say some thoughts and put some prayers out to those that were victims of the bombings in Boston. Now, I don't know if this was a terrorist act or some lone nut or something else, and it doesn't really matter. What we need to focus on here, folks, is the heroes, the first responders, the police, the firemen, those that helped the victims in this tragedy. The more we focus and quote-unquote give glory to the criminals that did this act, the worse off it will be. Let's focus on the ones that helped, the ones that actually helped their fellow man, the ones who loved one another. That's what we need to focus on here. Now, in just a moment, we're going to start our episode of MKTV. We're going to talk about the Smiley Face Killers here in just a moment. But before we do that, I just wanted to touch on that for just a second here. So let's take a moment and stop and think about those people in Boston. Sadly, this is becoming a nearly everyday occurrence where we hear something bad on the news. Let's not focus on the bad, let's focus on the good. Good things like this program, where we're trying to make a difference. You can help to do that. And we'll start right now with a brand new episode of MKTV in just mere moments. Thank you for joining me. John Walsh momentarily, in which he can explain a little bit better what's going on with the status of America's Most Wanted. Now, there is a pilot episode for a spin-off show known as John Walsh Investigates. Now, so far, there's only been one episode of that show that has been filmed. Lifetime was supposed to air that as a series, but with them canceling America's Most Wanted, it appears as if they're putting that on hold for the moment. Will they have John Walsh Investigates on Lifetime in the future? Nobody knows at this point. Will America's Most Wanted show up on CBS or CNN or some other type of channel? It's possible, but nobody really knows yet. It's sad to think that this show has been off the air for about 7 months now. This show really needs to find a home. For what it's worth, capture number 1203 occurred just recently, even while the show was off the air. A lady whose last name was King was recently captured via a tip from a AMW viewer. So it's good to see that even while the show is not on the air, that they're still capturing fugitives. So that's some good news right there. So in just a second, I am going to play a clip of John Walsh explaining what exactly is the status of America's Most Wanted. So we'll go and we'll play that right now.
With us now, John Walsh, also our senior correspondent, John Miller, a former FBI assistant director. Welcome to you both. So, John Walsh, before your show, did people even have a sense of this? I mean, how did you see things change?
Well, Fox approached me in 1987 and said, would you like to host the first reality television show modeled after Crime Watch UK, done by the BBC in England, on a brand new one-night network called Fox, owned by a man named Rupert Murdoch. I went, no thank you, I don't know anything about TV. Who's Rupert Murdoch? What is reality TV? And they said, well, we have one little hit with a guy named Johnny Depp, a struggling musician. And so I agreed to do it because after 6 months, a child killer was the first guy they wanted to do, David James Roberts. I'll never forget it. FBI top 10 guy who escaped from 5 life sentences, raped 27 women, and murdered 4 children. My wife said, this is what we do. Go do it, John. And that started America's Most
And when
Wanted.
did you realize that your show had a huge impact?
All the TV critics said it won't work, it'll fail, it's the father of a murdered child host, untried, it's never been done before. 3 days after the first show aired in February of '88, we nailed David James Roberts, sociopathic murderer. Guess what he was doing for a living? Running a shelter for the homeless on Staten Island while he was on the FBI's top 10. Then the show was a hit and we launched.
John Miller.
Hi, we are back on the air with MKTV. This is episode number 66. We're talking about the Smiley Face Killers. Now, if you're a long-time listener of this program, you'll remember that way back in episode number 6, we talked about the Smiley Face Killers. Now, this is a group of individuals, or maybe it's just one individual, but the evidence tends to point towards there being more than one individual. That take college kids who have been inebriated and drinking in bars and possibly is kidnapping them and murdering them and leaving them in rivers and streams all over the country. There's somewhere upwards of 80 to 100 cases of this similar nature. Now, we've talked about this in the past, and I've made some friends lately. I've made my friend Ian, my friend Christy, and another friend named Bill, who Bill is one of the parents of one of the victims, and due to the fact that this is all going on, we decided to go and do this again. So with that, we thought that it would be a good idea to talk about the Smiley Face Killers once again. Now, in addition to that, we have we're going to talk about America's Most Wanted and the status of that. John Walsh himself recently went on CBS this morning and talked about the status of America's Most Wanted. Now, if you haven't listened to this program in a while, first off, make sure you hit that follow button so you can follow along and you can get all of our broadcasts. But if you have not heard the news, unfortunately, America's Most Wanted has been canceled. Yes, it's been canceled not just from the Fox network, but it has also been canceled from Lifetime. John Walsh himself is looking into other options. He's talking with Fox, and they're trying to get the show put onto other channels and other stations and things like that. But they have not had much luck yet. I will play a clip with...
from the law enforcement perspective, it really did change things, didn't it?
It was unique, and it was a boon for the law enforcement business. In the FBI, one of the divisions that was under my control was investigative publicity and public affairs. Right. There's a dozen people who sit around every day trying to figure out how can we get the face of this bad guy out in front of the public. And, that's, well, you put him on the wall of the post office. Right. This was before the Internet really had
There was no vehicle like this out there before this.
And this came along and it changed the whole business. We could say, we want this guy bad. We could say, let's line it up with America's Most Wanted. And plus, that was in normal people we were looking for a long time. 17 top 10 fugitives. I mean, aside from the hundreds of others, 17 of the 10 most wanted captured just off tips from this show. But there were cases like the murder of Everett Hatcher, a DEA agent, where they would just stop everything and do the whole show on that one case and really give us the kind of push we couldn't get.
So, John Walsh, and given even that record, your show has been canceled. So what's next?
Well, I have a pilot with Lifetime. They've been very nice to me, and I've wanted to reach out to my friend Jeff Zucker at CNN. We've caught guys off of 45 in 45 countries. I've worked with Interpol. Whether I host it or I don't host it, whoever does it, it needs to be done. We've caught 1,200 fugitives, brought home 60 missing kids. I think it's a great use of television, and I hope it continues because I've been there. Took 27 years to solve my son's case. I know what it's like to be frustrated and not get justice. We had great success on our internet, caught 40 guys off the internet in the last 2 years. I think it is something that needs to be on television because we really are the court of last resort.
All right. John Walsh, good luck. Thank you very much for being here this morning, and John Miller as well.
All right, so there you have it. You heard it from John Walsh himself. He may be going to CNN. He might not even be the host at some point in the future. It's up in the air at the moment here. We don't really know. I know that there are some other individuals that are interested in being host. I think Elizabeth Smart, I think, was one name that was thrown out there. So will AMW resurface? Will it be rebranded, republished as something else? That remains to be seen at this point. Okay, now we're going to go to commercial in a few minutes, but before I do that, I need to explain something. Okay, we're going to talk about the Smiley Face Killers when we come back, but I need to explain something. Okay, sometimes I get flooded with so many different cases and so many different projects that I don't have enough time to properly do a episode the way that it should be done. So what I do is sometimes I ask other advocates and other media outlets and whatnot to assist me in doing such programs. Okay, now I'm going to play a clip later after we come back from commercial from my friends Ian and Christy. I've spoken to Christy personally. We've chatted through email and stuff like that. But they're going to be talking about the Smiley Face Killers. But this is a lengthy clip. It's about 80 some odd minutes. Okay, but they are going to talk about the Smiley Face Killers, and they're going to help me to finish this program. I will be back after their segment has aired. We're going to link up with their show, and we're going to play their clip. And when their segment is finished, I will be back with a monologue and other information and stuff like that. Make sure you hit that follow button. Share this program with your friends. The Smiley Face Killers are very vicious, evil people, and their story needs to be brought to light. So after the commercial break, we're going to talk more about the Smiley Face Killers right here on Missing Kids TV.
With us now, John Walsh, also our
Now you can get the same AMW gear that cops all ask us for. AMW ball caps, AMW shirts, AMW mugs, and much more. Just go to our website, amw.com. Click on AMW gear. Soon, you'll be making a difference with style.
Well, as a couple of inches of snow piles up silently here in America's heartland, I'm reminded of a couple of things. First of all, that Vancouver would love to have the snow we're getting. They're like cursed when it comes to the weather in Vancouver, although apparently they've been holding it together just enough for the Winter Olympics. But here in the upper Midwest, this recent slathering of snow reminds us that there are clues that are waiting for the spring thaw, clues to a series of murders that many people feel strongly have been taking place. Overall, across the country, there's been over 100 disappearances of college-age men who fall into the same category. They would be considered successful young men, good-looking, students who, at least for a period of the last evening of their life, had gone out drinking. And not ridiculous kinds of, stories, pretty typical sort of drinking episodes. And then somehow were never heard from again. Many of them have been found weeks, sometimes months later, sometimes, sadly, after a spring thaw. And they were found along or in